So I'd like to welcome you all to today's panel. Today we have a great lineup for you of some current students and recent alumni from our environment and sustainability related programs who are here to answer all your questions about what their experience is like either currently studying the program or having studied in the past and moving on to exciting careers. So first I want to give a few housekeeping not rules, but information that, of course, since we are here today with current students and alumni, we are going to be keeping questions focused on their experiences. We will not be answering any questions about the application process today, but we do have a lot of different events coming up in the next few weeks where you can get your application questions answered. So please feel free to join us at one of those. I'm actually going to drop some links in the chat here now for you, where you can see all of our upcoming events. We also had an event just yesterday, which hopefully some of you were able to join us for, with some of the program coordinators from these programs. So that is already recorded and up on YouTube. You can go and check that out and perhaps get some application questions answered there. We also have an event next week called Virtual Application Week, where we have 20 different events, one again specifically on environment and sustainability, that you can join us if you have questions there. So today we're going to focus just on the student experience of these programs. And we always have a few questions about what programs are contained within the subject area. So in environment and sustainability, we have our program in environmental sciences and sustainability science. Environmental studies and sustainability science. There's always a lot of S's there, which we acronym to LUMES, which you can see here in Sarah and Halley's pages. And then we have our environmental management and policy program, or as the acronym goes, EMP, from Elaine and Tamsin. And we also have an Erasmus program within this subject area called Environmental Sciences, Policy and Management, where the third semester of the program is held in Lund and takes mostly all of the same classes as the Environmental Management and Policy program. So those are the three programs that we'll be highlighting here today. And now, without further ado, I'd love to introduce ourselves. I suppose I didn't ever introduce myself. So my name is Audrey, and I am an International Communications Officer here at Lund. I'll be moderating the panel. And perhaps our panel can also introduce themselves. We can start with you, Sarah.
Yes, hello, I'm Sarah. I'm from Germany and I study LUMES and I started last year. So I'm in my third semester now.
Great. Elaine?
Hi, my name is Elaine. I'm also in my second year of the EMP program and I'm from Kenya.
And Halley and Tamsin?
My name's Halley. I'm originally from the US and I studied in Lund. I did study in Lund, I studied LUMES, and I live now in Stockholm. We're both here in Stockholm, but Tamsin's usually down in Skåne. And I currently work for Normative, where we work with climate impact analysis and reduction.
Yeah, my name's Tamsin, and I studied the Environmental Management and Policy program. I finished that in June last year, and I now work at Tetra Pak in Lund in the sustainability department on quite a wide range of different sustainability related projects.
And a great thing to point out there for anyone who isn't aware is Tetra Pak is quite famous around the world. If you have used anything essentially that holds a liquid in a cardboard type container, you have benefited from Tetra Pak's knowledge. And that is a creation right here from Lund. But great. And also I want to let our audience know that you can ask us any questions you have throughout the event by using the Q&A, which is at the bottom of the screen. So you can type your questions there. We'll be happy to answer them. And if you have the same question that someone else has already asked, you can give that question a thumbs up and that will bump it up to the top of the list so that we can answer it. But first, of course, I would love to hear from everybody what was or is your favorite thing about studying your program here at Lund, and perhaps why you chose it as well. Maybe we'll go back around the opposite way this time. So we'll start with Tamsin.
Yeah, sure. Okay, so what I loved about the EMP program was, first of all, how international it was. I think we had 15 different nationalities in my class alone. I also loved how it had extreme practical aspects to it. I think I did 3 different consultancy projects during the 3 years. Also got to go to Kenya for the final big project, which was incredible. And yeah, just the amount of hands-on experience and going and doing different field trips, going to visit different companies, seeing how you can actually apply what we learn in the classroom in the real world. Yeah, that's what I really loved about the program.
Wonderful. Halley?
Yeah, I mean, I guess kind of on the same line as Tamsin, for sure, my favorite part of the program was the people in the program. I mean, we were about 45 students and we were from 28 countries, which was just the most, and from all types of backgrounds. And I think that's true with most of the international programs in Lund and the master programs, is that you don't need a specific background to actually be in the program. So we had people who were doctors, were journalists, biologists, engineers, everything. And to then all come to the same conclusion of wanting to work within sustainability was just a really amazing atmosphere to be around. So.
Yeah. Elaine?
Yeah, I think Tamsin has already covered most of the stuff about the EMP program. It's very international, but also it's a very small group of students because they're like mostly about 30 students, which makes it like very easy to like interact with everybody. But also the institute where the program is offered, our professors or teachers are doing research into all these areas. So it's very easy to also like look into what kind of work they're doing.
Wonderful. Sarah?
Yeah, for me, it's mainly like we do have a lot of group work, which I really like. And we do, I think Halley mentioned the same thing, that we have people from all different kinds of professions. So people who study fashion, physics, or other things. And then you can come together in the group work and really have different perspectives on things and learn a lot from each other. So I like that.
Oh, that sounds great. I'm really curious about something, Elaine, you actually just touched on about the professor relationship. I know that's something that is often quite surprising to students when they come to Sweden, but can you share a little more about that, about how the professors and the students kind of relate to each other in the classroom?
Yeah, I think having done my undergraduate in the US, it was less shocking, but it's kind of like the same thing. I think when back home in Kenya, it's a very, I don't know, there's a very big power dynamic between the professors and the student, but when you come here, you realize like most of them are like kind of your friends. You can go to them with any questions, you can work on projects together. So it really makes it easy to learn and interact with them.
Yeah, great. Is that the same experience everyone else has had? Hopefully, or anything to add? Great. I know it's often quite shocking to students, as you said, Elaine, that come from countries with more hierarchical structure, that you also call your professors by their first name in Sweden and have a lot of that casual contact. Wonderful. Another thing I'm curious to hear about is the actual structure of the program. So do you find that the courses are quite laid out, or do you have a little bit more flexibility as far as taking electives or even just tailoring the content of the program to your areas of interest? Perhaps, Sarah, we could start with you with LUMES.
Yes, so within the first year in LUMES, you have like the structures already built for you. But then in the first semester where I'm right now, you can choose electives, and then depending on like which interest you have. And then obviously for the thesis, you can choose whatever topic you're interested in. So it's like half and half.
Mm-hmm. Okay, great. Is that the same for EMP?
EMP is, I think, more flexible because we have the first semester is very fixed because most people are coming from different backgrounds. So it's very important to catch everybody up like to the same level. But then after that, you have a lot of opportunities to choose the kind of courses you want to take, or like consultancies, what company you want to work in, what particular area of EMP you want to concentrate on. As Tamsin said, there's a consultancy project where you work with companies and you can actually travel to different countries around the world for that particular project. And similarly to LUMES, then during the thesis semester, you can do that anywhere in the area that you're interested in.
Great. That actually leads me really well into a question from our audience. Someone is wondering about the internship experience in EMP and if you're able to combine your internship with your thesis research. So perhaps Tamsin, if you could start, is that something you did when you did your internship or your extra experience in EMP? Did you combine it with your thesis?
Well, I didn't do an internship. I chose to do the consultancy project, which is, that was in one of our courses. You get to choose between organizing your own internship or going along with one of the consultancy projects that has been put together. That's in one of the courses. And then later in the second year, you have this consultancy course that everyone does. But I guess I could say with my thesis, I combined that with a partnership with Tetra Pak. So I did my thesis in partnership with them. So that was sort of in a way a little bit like an internship combined with research. If that makes sense.
Definitely. And what about you, Elaine?
Personally, I'm not planning to do my thesis as an internship, but that's an opportunity. Like if you know a company or written to a company and they want like a student to do a master thesis on something in the organization, then you can actually do that. But personally, I don't think I'll be doing that.
Okay.
Gotcha.
Yeah. And speaking of the thesis, do those of you who are current students know kind of what you're planning to write about? And also, I want to hear what you guys did write about, Halley and Tamsin, but I know it's about to move into the thesis semester for you guys. Sarah, do you have any ideas of what you'll be focusing on?
Yeah, we already had to like hand in a few things about that. So it's quite like during the third semester, you already get like kind of led into your thesis. Mm-hmm. And I will be writing about food waste in Sweden. And yeah.
I smile because I know a little bit already what Halley did. Perhaps you want to share what your thesis was on?
Yeah, that'll be very interesting to talk about, Sarah. I wrote my thesis on food waste reduction in Skåne in southern Sweden. So I worked alongside the county municipality board. So I worked within the public sector with them and worked with all of the municipalities in southern Sweden to do an evaluation of basically how they were working to reduce food waste on the public sector side. So that in itself was very practical is what I really wanted to be focusing on. And I guess Sarah shares my very maybe strange passion for food waste, but it was really a really amazing opportunity.
Oh, that's awesome. We'll have to get you guys connected after this. Send your thesis over. Awesome. Elaine, what about you? What will you be focusing on for your thesis?
And that's actually a huge coincidence because when I first started thinking about my thesis, I was going to focus on food waste. But in the Kenyan system, then I realized they may not have a lot of materials on that because it's not like a well-developed system yet. So I'm just going to look at municipal solid waste management and how that can be developed for like the rapidly growing urban areas in Africa or Kenya in this context. Yeah.
Oh, very cool. And Tamsin?
Yeah, I wrote my thesis surrounding climate compensation, looking into forestry related initiatives. So I was, sort of studying all of because currently there's such a huge rise in companies stating that they want to become net zero. So I was looking into how are they, like out of the companies that have signed up for the UN business ambition to 1.5 degrees, like those companies that are setting these science-based targets, which ones of them are using climate compensation to reach those targets, and how are they communicating that, and sort of trying to understand what seems to be a credible way to do that by looking at the perspective of multiple stakeholders. Yeah.
Wow, that also sounds really interesting. A lot of really cool projects there. That's great. For Halley and Tamsin, I'd love to hear a little bit more about what you're doing now with your work, and if you feel the programs prepared you for that, or what kind of knowledge and skills you bring into the work you're doing now. Maybe Halley, we'll start with you.
Sure. I'll say branching straight off of what I did with my thesis, I worked for the first year and a half with food waste reduction. I worked for Too Good To Go, which is the world's biggest food waste movement. And I was the first employee in Sweden for that because we launched in Sweden last year. So that tied very directly into what I was doing for that semester. Now it's a bit broader, and actually I'm working much more in the area of what Tamsin did her thesis on. So what's interesting is that I didn't deal really with, LUMES doesn't deal with as much policy side, and that's what I'm working a lot with now. So it kind of, I guess, set me up to be able to do that in the baselines, even if we weren't working with it as actively, because now we're working a lot basically with climate impact reduction, though we don't focus on offsetting at all.
Oh, that's great. And Tamsin, how about you?
Yeah, so I'm working, so I got into this, it's called the Future Talent Program at Tetra Pak, which is this 2-year graduate program, and I got into the sustainability area, and then from there I get to do different rotations around the company. So I got hired into the recycling team, so I've done a lot of projects related to collection and recycling because we have a lot going on all over the world. So that's been I found that connected to what I studied because there's a lot of policy related things, also talking about extended producer responsibility and yeah, just looking into the political situations in companies in countries as well. But then as well, I've done projects closer to the customer side to understand like their requests, and that's very much also connected to like legislation, but also to the consumer trends, and recyclability and circularity is a huge topic for us. And then I've also been working more with our suppliers, looking into their climate action plans and how are they going to reduce their emissions, because that's very necessary for us to make sure that they are doing as much as they can do, because that's connected to our scope 3 emissions. And then also a project related to water stewardship across our value chain. So that's also connected to what I've been learning in EMP related to the planetary boundaries. Yeah, so I mean, I feel like a lot of what we learned in many different aspects of the classes is like relevant to what I'm doing now, whether it be connected to our strategy or our sustainability report, or looking into what's going on in the different markets around the world. Yeah, there's lots of connections there.
Yeah, that's great to hear. And I'm guessing, but I'll ask anyway, did the project that you said you did within the business consultancies for Tetra Pak kind of open the door to exploring working with them afterwards, or did you make any connections there?
I don't know, I guess like, yeah, I met a few people there, and then that's where I heard about the program, but I still had to go through the whole, it was a huge, yeah, a very intense application process. And I don't know, I mean, I guess they would have known that I'd done my thesis with them, but I don't know if I got like preferential treatment, but yeah.
Yeah, but definitely cool to have gotten to test them out a little bit, I guess, before you decided to work with them. Awesome. Great. So we have another great question here from someone who's interested in both LUMES and EMP, and is wondering if you have opportunities to interact with each other in the different programs, or if you have any overlap within studying together. I guess I'll let anyone take that.
Not really. Well, we didn't interact. So.
No, I mean, there's a lot of organizations outside of the programs themselves that tend to have a lot of overlap with people who are interested in similar topics. And so then there's a lot. I'll say that was actually something we talked about a lot, especially my first year. I finished in 2019. In my first year, we talked about trying to kind of strengthen those relationships. But it's, I think, unfortunately, you're so busy with school. Oftentimes it's hard to do it. But I really think we'd benefit a lot from having a lot more mix between the two programs, because they do have their differences for sure, even though there's many similar-minded people. So I think you can definitely champion that on the side yourself. It's very possible, but it's not as much within the actual program. Maybe that's changed in 2 years. So I don't know. Maybe you guys would have a better idea.
No, unfortunately not. It's the same thing. We kept meeting with like LUMES, and like we're like, oh, we should have joint classes because we're kind of in the same space, but yeah, it's not happened yet. So hopefully in the next few years.
Hopefully something you can champion, as Halley said. But you do have the overlap with MESPOM, right, Elaine? So the students who are coming from the Erasmus program share courses with EMP, correct?
Yeah, so for the one semester that they're here, we actually don't share classes throughout the semester. It's particularly the last 2 courses, which we're currently doing, which are focused on the thesis. So it's like research methodology and then applied research, which is an elective. And you choose like one of the 4 research themes of the institute. And then after that, the student from MESPOM can decide to stay in Lund for their thesis semester, or they can decide to go back out to a different place altogether.
Gotcha. Yeah, great. We have another question about for people who considered both programs, if any of you considered both programs, or if you had already chosen kind of narrowing it down to one before you applied. I guess I'll let everyone answer that. So Sarah, we can start with you.
I don't think I heard of EMP before applying to LUMES, so I just chose LUMES.
That makes it an easy choice then. Elaine, did you apply to both, or you would narrow it down?
Yeah, I actually applied to both LUMES and EMP, and I chose EMP as my first choice because I thought, for me, it sounded more practical, and then the policy aspect, which I was really interested in. But even if I'd not gotten to EMP, like LUMES is very similar, so I wouldn't have seen like a very big difference between the 2 of them.
Great. Tamsin?
No, well, I just applied for EMP. I didn't know. Well, actually, I knew LUMES from you, but no, I only applied for EMP.
I did a lot of research on all the different programs, especially my bachelor's in environmental science. And what I really liked about LUMES was the fact that it was interdisciplinary, of having the combination of both natural science and social science, because I didn't have as much social science background. And so, I mean, to be honest, was not interested in the policy aspect at all. So that's why I didn't apply to EMP, because that was exactly what I did not want to be in. And then that's what I'm in now. So, I mean, I think what's pretty amazing is that you can kind of, I mean, sustainability is so broad that you really, I mean, can get into it in different aspects. Of course, if you're going to be going into climate science, you need a bit more of a natural science background. But I mean, it's a pretty applicable field, regardless of background. So that's why I only did LUMES.
Great. And kind of leading into that a little bit about the content, at least, of each of the programs. We have a question specifically for LUMES here, but I'm curious about it for both programs, actually, about how theoretical is it versus practical as far as the actual information you're studying. So maybe, Sarah, if you want to answer that for LUMES.
I would say that it's quite more on the theoretical side for most things. We had one more practical project that was going on in the second semester, where we were working with companies, for example, if we wanted to, but most of it is quite academic and quite theoretical, I would say. Yeah.
And Elaine, for EMP, I'm guessing it almost sounds so far with the business consultancies and everything a bit the opposite, but.
Yeah, I think EMP is more practical. There's still some theoretical aspect of it, especially at the introduction. But even when you're doing policy, we try to look at actual policies in place and analyzing those. So it's still very practical.
Yeah, great. Yeah. Another question from our audience here, and I want to also actually, before I ask this, just reiterate for the audience, in case anyone has joined us late and missed the introductions. I realize we're using a lot of acronyms here that people might not be familiar with. So LUMES is our Environmental Studies and Sustainability Science program, and EMP is our Environmental Management and Policy program. So we have Sarah and Elaine here who are current students in these programs, and Halley and Tamsin who are semi-recent alumni from these programs, or Alumnae, I should say. So just to make it clear, in case our acronyms are confusing you a little bit. And MESPOM is our program that is an Erasmus program. So you spend one semester here at Lund, and that's Environmental Sciences, Policy, and Management, just to clear up some acronyms. But jumping into the next question. So Eva asks, how did not having an academic background in the environmental subjects affect you at the start of the master, which I think is really interesting. Also, perhaps you could each share, for those who haven't already, what your background was in, what you did your bachelor's in, to give us an idea too of the kind of many different fields that people join these from. So maybe we'll go the opposite way around. So we'll start with Tamsin.
Yeah, sure. So I studied, I forgot to say I'm from Australia, and I studied my bachelor's in Melbourne in commerce. So it was in, I majored in management and marketing, international business, basically. So I didn't have a background in environmental studies, but I did focus a lot, during my studies, on sort of business ethics, and I got very interested in that area. So that's sort of what I guess led me eventually to this program. But yeah, I felt like as Elaine said, in our first semester, we very much get this sort of introduction to a lot of different classes, like intro to, I can't remember what it was all called, but sort of environmental science and all of this, just to make sure we're all on the same level. And that was very helpful. But yeah, we did have people from the business background, also people who'd studied geography, people who had studied policy. It was, yeah, a big mix. Also people who had been working in industry for 10 years and had come back to do their masters. So yeah.
Great. Halley?
Yeah, so I mentioned, but my bachelor's in environmental science, so it's more, well, it was called environmental studies, but it's a bachelor of science, so it was entirely natural science pretty much. And then I did an emphasis in organic chemistry, so that was a lot more on the natural science side. And then that's why I wanted to go more into a combination with that with social science.
And Elaine?
My background is actually in computer science, but I had taken a few classes in environmental science. But Tamsin said, I think the first semester is really it creates a good foundation. And some of the classes may sound a bit technical for people coming from like social sciences, and the vice versa for people coming from like quantitative studies. It may sound like very social sciencey. So there's always like that combination, but I feel like the teachers always try to understand like the different backgrounds and accommodate for that.
Wonderful. And Sarah?
I studied marketing before, so and we just had a tiny bit of social science in there. So most of it was quite new to me, but I would say it's similar to EMP. The first semester is a bit more like basic, like you learn a little bit about everything, and then we go more in deep when everybody has like the same level, more or less.
Gotcha. Great. It's good to have that kind of base to build everything on, I imagine. Perfect. Let's see. We have a couple questions here as well about the schedule of the courses. So could we talk a little bit about that, about if you're in class most of the week or not having as much in-class time, having time for extracurricular activities on the side? How tight is the schedule? And so Halley jumped right in with the mic, so maybe you wanted to start. No? Okay. Maybe Elaine, you can talk about that for EMP.
I think it keeps changing based on the course that you're taking. For a lot of the courses where you're doing research or group work, the amount of time you spend in class is very limited. You may go for like 2 or 3 lectures in a week, and then outside of that, you're doing your own research or you're working in your group. So it's a very collaborative process as well. And yeah, so that's usually like the case. There's never been a time when you spend like a full day in class. It's rarely, mostly around like presentations, but outside of that, it's not that intense.
Gotcha. And is that the same for LUMES, Sarah?
I would say in the first year we have quite a lot of classes, so it's like 1 class per day usually. But now when we have the electives, we have a bit more free time, and we have now 3 to 4 per week.
Okay, great. So definitely plenty of time for extracurricular activities, you would say, or to do things outside of class. Maybe Halley and Tamsin can weigh in there.
In my experience, no. We were in class like every day, especially the first year. It was extremely intense schedule. I wouldn't think that you could work part-time on this. It was a full-time job, basically. So that's what my experience was. I think we were there physically as well. I don't know, Elaine, if you've been also working hybrid model because of COVID or something, but yeah, that's how it was for us, at least. It was very intense, but it meant like you really do bond with your classmates because you're basically like you're there often, and because we have so many group works and projects and tight deadlines. Yeah, for me at least, it was quite a big change from my bachelor's, which was more like 3 lectures a week or something like that.
Yeah, I was going to say, I think it actually matters more on what your background is, because in the US, I mean, I was in class, a combination of class and both lectures and regular classes, usually about 40 hours a week. So like to come then to LUMES, which for me was about half that, if not less, I mean, in Sweden in general, a lot of the emphasis is on self-learning. And so you don't have as much scheduled lectures, at least in LUMES. And then a lot of it is expected to be, you're doing a lot of reading outside of class. And then we had a lot of group work on top of that. So even if it wasn't scheduled class, it ended up being still more than it looked like on paper. But it's also then in comparison to, compared to my bachelor, it was a lot more free time. So I did work the whole time I was studying, but that was a lot. But for me, it was very doable.
Yeah. Maybe the other difference, I think from the US is like you take like 4 courses throughout the whole semester, while here you take 1 or 2 courses, then that ends and you transition to the next course. And I think like for me personally, that's more flexible because you don't have like in a day try fix where you're gonna study 4 different things. You can just focus on one thing, and it makes it easier to get like extra time outside of class as well.
Yeah, definitely. And I would just add in here as well to the students asking about part-time jobs that what we always recommend at the university is that part-time jobs are rare to find, to be honest, because most of the typical jobs that you could get as a student, like working at a cafe or something, usually you need to speak Swedish. So of course that limits the options. And there's also just a lot more students that are looking for jobs than there are jobs in Lund. So we always recommend that they are out there. They do exist. As Halley said, she worked part-time as a student, but we always recommend that you consider it something of a bonus, that you don't come to Lund expecting that you'll find a part-time job that you will be able to use to pay all of your living expenses. Because even if you are able to find a part-time job, you likely won't have enough time to work it, 40 hours a week or something that would be a real salary in order to cover your expenses. So that's something definitely to keep in mind when you're considering funding for coming to Lund, for sure. Great, a lot of great questions here. It's almost hard to choose. Let's see. We have a question specifically about LUMES, asking to what extent climate change is addressed in LUMES. From the course titles, it doesn't seem to be a direct focus, but I assume it is still a fundamental topic. Either Halley or Sarah, whoever would like to answer that.
I would say it's like discussed in almost all courses. For sure, sustainability, there's always, like, whenever we learn about a social theory, there's always then like one link to sustainability at the end, so it's like always like in there somewhere.
Yeah, I would say that that was kind of the biggest part of sustainability, because with my bachelor being more natural science and environmental science, and maybe it's also more in the US, talking about environmental sustainability is the only type of sustainability we ever discussed. And LUMES talks about the full range of sustainability, which includes social sustainability. And so some version of sustainability is always mentioned. But I would say that climate change and environmental sustainability is always tied in. And especially, I think when you get the baseline in those first courses in the first year, then you use them in the more practical sense in the second year with the more targeted courses in certain areas, say if it's in pop culture, or if it's in gender studies, or if it's in all the other ones I took. Yeah, so.
Wonderful. And we have another question here about how common it is to find work in Sweden after graduating. And of course, we have 2 graduates here who have found work in Sweden. But maybe Halley and Tamsin, could you share of the rest of the students that you graduated with, around how many decided to stay in Sweden and work, who went back to their home countries, that kind of thing?
I'm trying to remember.
Yeah, I can say that finding work in, again, like Audrey said, it's not something I think you should completely bank on. I speak Swedish, which makes my life a lot easier. I made a very big effort to do that. And so that's the reason, at least for me, why I was able to stay, because I'm not an EU citizen. So that also makes it a lot harder to find a job. At this point in Sweden, you can get a after studies visa to be able to search for a job, and now it's for a year. But then you also have to be able to maintain living in Sweden for a year without a job, looking for a job potentially. And that's, at least financially, really can be really difficult. So I think, like, in terms of in my class, in terms of people who really wanted to stay in Sweden, I think eventually it seems like most people were able to. A lot of people wanted to go back to their home countries or go somewhere else. The Swedes found jobs for sure. I think that yeah, again, even though Sweden is a really, really high proficiency English speaking country, especially in government positions and public sector positions, those are all going to require Swedish. In tech, in a lot of in startups, that's more likely doesn't need Swedish, but at the same time, those are the ones that can't necessarily sponsor you to stay if you're not a EU citizen. So that's a good thing to keep in mind. But it's definitely possible. I mean, I do know a lot of people have done it, and I'm one of them. But it was stressful, and I worked very hard to be able to that. It was I'm happy that I did.
Definitely, that's a great point. Anything to add there, Tamsin?
Yeah, just I guess, like, thinking of my classmates, 2 of them are now doing their PhDs in the institute where we studied. And then, yeah, all the Swedes are in Sweden and in jobs. But then I do have my one classmate from Dubai who is also now just got a job here in Stockholm. And then in my company, I can speak English, which is nice because I don't speak Swedish. But it is that in some, like when I'm actually at the office, when it's open, there is a lot of Swedish and everything, but everything is done in English in business. So, I mean, but that's because it's a huge, like, company, international company. But in the smaller ones, you would, I guess having Swedish is very, very useful.
Yeah,
needed.
And I would also say that to be honest, for the most part, I think having strong English is actually more beneficial than than Swedish because most things within sustainability are on a larger scale and need to be done on an international level. So if it's only one, I mean, if you're competing essentially against a Swede who doesn't speak good English, actually the good English is oftentimes preferred. But yeah, that's just personal experience.
Yeah. Gotcha. So the next question I have is about EMP. Are you finding that you're learning a lot about policy writing and thinking with EMP? So perhaps Elaine, I'll let you take that one.
Yeah, I would say there's a lot of policy learning in the EMP program because it's one of like the main things we focus on. We start with like introduction to policy, which kind of like introduces you to what policy really means, and then we analyze some of the policies or directives or legislation at international and national levels. Then we have like policy analysis where we look at existing policies. So yes, there's a lot of learning, and even you kind of try to learn how you can design policies. So yeah.
Great, that sounds really fascinating. Clearing out a few questions here that we've already answered, but we've got a lot of really interesting questions coming in today. I want to clarify again for the audience that because we are here just with current students and alumni, we unfortunately won't be answering admission questions today about kind of how to apply and your eligibility. So we have a few of those here. I would encourage you to check out the links I've already posted in the chat to join us for one of our upcoming events next week about how to apply, because then we will have all of the answers you need there, and you'll be able to ask this in the Q&A there to our admission staff as well. We have a question from Hannah who says, thank you for clarifying, this was a bit earlier, about the internships options, and is wondering if you could expand more on the choice between the internships and business consultancies. So I'm imagining that's aimed toward EMP. So perhaps Elaine, we'll come back to you again if you can share a bit more about that.
Yes, the second semester, I think there's a choice to do an internship or a consultancy. The consultancy is 5 weeks, but then for the internship, you have to look that on your own. So if you don't have an internship already planned out, you can opt for the consultancy that the teachers arrange for us. So that's the first option of doing like an internship consultancy. Then during the summer, if you want, you can also like do an internship with a company, but that's independent. You don't have to do that. That's optional. Then during the third semester, we have a consultancy course that all the students undertake. And then for your last semester of your thesis, you can choose to combine that as an internship as well. So those are all the options.
Perfect. Thanks for clarifying that. Then we have another question about overlapping courses. So if there is any overlap between the LUMES program and disaster risk management and climate change adaptation, which is a program based in our engineering faculty that actually has quite a bit of tech in it, more than you would think based on the title. So I imagine there's probably not much overlap there, but if I'm wrong, please set me straight.
No, I know people from the program, again, based on outside activities that we've done together. So one of my good friends actually did it. But in terms of courses, no.
Yeah, great. So Sarah, the student that asked that question, I would also recommend, if you want, in the links that I posted in the chat, we have 2 student ambassadors from that program. So if you're curious about disaster risk management, you can hop over after the event into that link and ask them any questions you have if you want to hear kind of the differences between the 2 programs. Great. So we also have a question about LUMES, about the fieldwork and practical aspects. I think we talked a little bit about this, but I would imagine perhaps fieldwork is more in relation to your thesis. Is that correct? Maybe Sarah, if you have the opportunity to do any practical work in the program.
Yeah, I mentioned before that we have like a longer project running over the second semester. And that's like, I wouldn't say it's fieldwork, but it's like practical. You can work with like companies or with like the municipality, for example. It depends on what topic you choose. And then, yeah, fieldwork, I would say, is thesis, but otherwise, yeah, that's it.
Okay. Yeah, and then there's some field trips that are in different courses depending on the relevance. So then that also that.
Great, that makes sense. What kind of field trips and things did you do, out of curiosity?
At the very beginning, we have one where we go for a couple of days. I'm wondering with COVID stuff, but what we did is like a like a retreat as well. It wasn't a retreat because it was work, but it was basically kind of a bonding experience to get to know everyone offsite for a couple of days. And then we did a lot of field work there in terms of actually working with soil science. And that was within our more natural science class. And then within the other classes, there's other things like visiting the relevant bodies that we're learning about, different actors. Yeah.
Great. Thanks. I have someone asking to repost the links because they joined late. So I just did that for you in the chat, Sarah. So feel free to check those out. Let's see. We have a few questions here now about more generally studying in Lund, which is also something I'd love to talk a bit about. The first question is about accommodation, which is of course always a big question folks have. Is it hard to find accommodation in Lund? And I would first clarify for anyone who isn't aware that if you're coming to Lund as a non-EU citizen, you will be covered under the housing guarantee with LU accommodation, meaning that as long as you apply on time, you will be given guaranteed housing. For those of you who are coming as a EU citizen, it is independent for you to find housing, though there are a lot of different options in Lund. So perhaps those of you who did come as EU citizens, maybe you'd like to share a bit more about your process of searching for housing. So maybe Sarah, we can hear from you on that.
Yeah, I went like as soon as I got the results, I kind of went like everywhere and looked everywhere. And then I ended up finding private housing on like what is it called, Bopolen? Yeah, and then I just found it there. So it was quite easy for me, but I started looking from the beginning. I think it gets a bit more hard towards like August, but it should be possible. Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. And that's always the advice we give as well in our office. As long as you start looking as soon as you're admitted, you don't put it off. Usually everything works out and you're able to find something. There's Bopolen, as Sarah mentioned, which is the website for private accommodation for anyone who kind of has an extra room to rent or extra apartments, things like that. There's also housing to be found through the student nations, through housing accommodations such as AF Bostader, and other options. But usually it can be very difficult if you start to look late. That is the time when students usually run into problems. So the important thing is just to be on top of it and look early when that's the case. Great. I'd also just love in general to ask all of you, what was the thing that perhaps surprised you most about studying in Sweden or about Lund in general when you came as an international student? Perhaps we'll start with Tamsin.
Sure. I think maybe as a contrast from studying in Australia, where I worked like 16 hours a week in a part-time job, and university was sort of like I went to my class, did my assignments, but I was also very much like working at the same time. But then in Lund, I felt like my whole life I was a student, like that my life was being a student, and I got to actually just like enjoy that, which was quite cool. I think also one thing was like the darkness is a bit of a shock, especially in winter. So you have to be prepared and take vitamin D.
Absolutely good advice.
Yeah.
Elaine, what about you?
So my reason for doing my master's in Lund was the fact that I came originally as an exchange student. So I guess as a master's student, it wasn't that not too much was shocking because I'd already studied there for a semester. But I would say that it's really the focus on the international students is so huge, since such a big percentage of the Lund's full campus are international. But on top of that, especially in master programs, it's like 60% of students are international, yeah, which is just such a unique vibe to have, because back in California, I think we had 10% out of state, which includes out of California, in the US, and international combined out of the entire student body. So you met one person who was international, and that was exciting. I mean, here it's like the community is so strong, and that's also my reason why I came back. It's why I chose to live in Sweden, is I think that Lund's incredibly unique in that way. And that's not common outside of really in Sweden, and then the US, maybe in certain other parts of, but very not common like that. So I mean, it's such an amazing community, and yeah, it's really special.
Also, like Lund has, I think the population's like 90,000 people, and 40,000 of those are students. So it's like, it's a massive student city, and it's like you ride bikes everywhere, and there's it's a very good atmosphere. I love it.
Oh, that's great to hear. That's actually, I also was an alumni of Lund, though not in environment and sustainability. I studied applied cultural analysis, but that also, I would totally agree. One of the hugely special things about Lund is the international student population and how important that is. Awesome. Elaine, how about you? What was something that surprised you most about Lund or about Sweden in general when you came?
Not about Lund in particular, but about like classwork. It's like a lot of group work, which I didn't expect that to be. I think I was very used to doing my assignments by myself, knowing when I'm going to deliver them, and then now having to work with like groups of 5 or 6 students and trying to coordinate in that. It was very challenging at first, but then you realize actually this is kind of like a real world situation. Like once you're out there, you'll be working with so many other people. And then the other thing was like the biking culture. It's so crazy even now to see people biking during winter, because to me that's just crazy. So
yeah, that's definitely always some top advice moving to Lund is get a bike as soon as possible. Wonderful. And Sarah, how about you?
Yeah. Yeah, for me it was like also the amount of group work, but then also having, because I was used to having like all my exams at the end of the semester. And now I have everything like all the assignments throughout the semester, and I do think it's better in a way, but then also you continuously have to do stuff, yeah, which is both good and bad, I would say. But yeah, and yeah, also like that it is, I think it's great that it's so international, but I had a bit of a hard time like not learning Swedish, but like managing to speak it a lot or hear it a lot, because I would like to learn more Swedish, but then everybody everywhere speaks English. So yeah.
That is always tough. For sure. That is something also to quickly ask is we always have a lot of students that are curious kind of about if you need to learn Swedish or don't need to. Of course, we've spoken a lot today, I think, about how much English is used throughout, but of course, Halley talked about how helpful Swedish can be if you're planning to stay in Sweden. So for each of you, I know Halley, you put quite a lot of effort into learning Swedish, but for everyone else, how do you feel about kind of the need to learn Swedish versus being able to use English in your daily life while here? And have you taken any of the options to learn Swedish? We have probably the most common is something called SFI, which is Swedish for Immigrants, which is a free course that's offered through the government in order to help learn Swedish. So I guess I'll let anybody who would like to jump in with that. That was also like 5 questions at once. I'm sorry.
I did the first 2 semesters of SFE, so it was very, learning Swedish from the very beginning, which was also a nice way to meet people. I've got a really good friend now that I met in that course, but I didn't actually stick with it because it was during the last year of my master's and during the thesis semester, I just didn't feel like I could commit. They wanted I think it was over 20 hours a week on that, and so it was just personally I couldn't fit it in, but I mean I think it is a nice thing to be able to learn, but at the same time, as we've just said, in Lund especially, I felt like I could get around fine not knowing it, and I also feel that now in my job.
Great. We have a couple questions here, particularly about why everyone chose their programs, which is something I know we talked about earlier in the session. So just in the sake of time, I'm going to reference you guys to perhaps come back and watch in case you missed the beginning of the session, because I see you posted these questions kind of late. So if you weren't here in the beginning, come and watch the recording afterwards, just so we can save time and get a few other questions in. We also have someone wondering for the EMP program, if you can write your thesis with another student or if it's only individual. So maybe Elaine, since you're about to go into that.
Yeah, it's all individual work. You can kind of work on the same topic, but you can all collaborate on the actual thesis.
Gotcha. And is that the same for LUMES, Sarah?
We could write as couples if we wanted to. Some people are doing it.
Okay. Yeah, some difference there. Let's see. We also have, to clarify, when housing is guaranteed for non-EU students, this is on-campus university-sponsored housing. Yes, that's correct, Lindsay. You have understood correct. So EU students can apply to the LU accommodation housing, but because it is reserved specifically for non-EU students, it generally speaking fills up with non-EU students, but it is an option to apply, but we always recommend that EU citizens do not bank on the university sponsored housing as your main option, for sure. Great. We also have questions about extracurricular activities, which is something we haven't gotten around to yet. So I'd love to hear, what does everyone do in their free time, or what did you do, Halley and Tamsin, when you were here? I know Sarah and Elaine, this might be a bit of an odd year for you guys, because of course you were here last year during Corona when most of the student life was shut down, unfortunately. But is there anything that you've gotten involved with more this year, now that we're a little bit more back to normal? Maybe Sarah, we'll start with you.
Yeah, so I do dance lessons once a week, and then I also volunteer at the food cooperative here in Lund, where I help out giving out like vegetables, and yeah, that's it.
Hey, Elaine?
Yeah, there's a time I used to play football or soccer before things shut down again. But then during the weekends, like try go hiking or just like seeing places around. I think like Sweden or Lund is very beautiful. So like there's so many places you can get to by the bus. So yeah.
Oh, wonderful. And Halley and Tamsin, I guess you guys had what is a bit more of a normal time at Lund before Corona, which is hopefully what our audience will be experiencing by the time they get here next autumn. So what was your extracurricular life like? Maybe we'll start with Halley.
So I was very, very, very involved in the student nations. So I was actually worked as a foreman, which is the managers of the student nations. And that took up a lot of my time, which is, I can't recommend it higher. It's I think the best way to get involved in terms of getting to know, especially Swedes, getting to know other students, because if people aren't aware of how the nations work, they basically are student organizations that are full houses that you can have housing in. We have, I say we still, that's terrible, forever. But basically anything from meals to clubs to pubs to special events that are only a couple times a year, like big balls, like big like dances. It's everything, sports teams, reoccurring events. I think it's the most incredible and unique thing that exists in Lund, because it really enriches the student life. And to get involved on that level of actually organizing not only is great socially, but also, I mean, in terms of contacts, it also was very helpful. And I got free food all the time. So that was also great, since I couldn't, I was working, but that other perks. So, it's so all encompassing in everything you could possibly be interested in. So you can get involved in something, and you don't need to get involved on that level of actually managing, but you can just attend anything you want. So I think that's, it's huge.
Yeah, because how many nations they have? Like
13.
Yeah,
well, 12 incorporated in 13.
Yeah, and then there's normally like a little calendar, and you can see every day what's going on. So some nations host lunches, some have pub nights, quiz nights, bar nights, club nights, which was really fun. And yeah, it's a really fun way also, as Halley said, I volunteered at quite a few as well when I was here on exchange, and it was an awesome way to meet Swedish people, because otherwise it can be a bit hard. But yeah, and yeah, you might help like prepare a brunch for like 60 people, and then of course you can take home food if you want, and you also get this little like you can go to a tack sittning, like a thank you sittning, sort of dinner dance thing, which is also a really fun experience. Yeah.
Absolutely. Nation life is definitely one of those purely unique Lund things that makes Lund so special. Great. I think we have time for one last question from the audience here, and then I have a final question I'd like to ask as well. So Taichi asks if getting help or advice about your studies from the professors is easy. So that comes back a little bit to kind of the program life and relationships to the professors we talked about earlier. But maybe Elaine, you could share a bit about that.
Yeah, I think generally it's very easy to get help from professors. Most of them will even have like office hours that you can book like appointments with them, but like throughout classes, they'll always be like, if you need extra help on anything, they're really available for you to get in touch with them. So yeah, it's very easy.
Great. And Sarah, has that been your experience as well with LUMES?
Yeah, it's quite easy. Like they have the emails everywhere, like after class or between breaks or something.
Perfect. Awesome. And since we just have a couple minutes left here, I'd like to end by perhaps asking everyone if you had a piece of advice you could give to anyone considering your program, or anything really that you think is special about your program that we haven't talked about at some point. What would you like to share with people considering? Maybe we'll start with our alumni. So Tamsin, if you'd like to go first.
Yeah, I'm just thinking of advice. I mean, I would highly recommend. I think it was an excellent experience, and I've met some incredible people during this time. I think one special memory I have is also during Christmas. We normally have this really special dinner with everybody, and we set up long tables, and everyone sings songs from their country or tells us about a tradition from where they're from if they don't celebrate Christmas. And we also all like join hands and dance around like frogs, because this is like a Swedish tradition, except you're supposed to do
Christmas.
No, but in midsummer, but they wanted us to experience it also in winter. Anyway, so you get to there are just fun times when possible. I know now with COVID it's a bit different. Oh, and another thing, sorry, before you start the program, we normally go to Lund, which is this nature reserve, and you get to do 2 days of just sort of hiking and team building activities, and you all cook together and eat together and dance together, and it was a very nice way to just get to know everyone at the beginning.
Oh, that's so lovely to hear. Thank you for sharing that. Halley, what about you? What would be your biggest tips for potential LUMES students?
I mean, I would say like in the same kind of thing, if I directly compare it to my bachelor, which I loved, but was very different. I think in terms of the interaction between students and with the faculty and with the staff and with the entirety of Lund, it's much more interactive, and part of that is just the size of it. I mean, you have access to such incredible professors and researchers, but then also just the people around you. I mean, I've met so many wonderful people in all aspects, but yeah, the people that were in my program are just, I thought that the first day I started, and I felt that all the way through for 2 years, and they're some of my absolute best friends in the whole world. And there's such inspiring people from so many different backgrounds. And I think to be able to actually organize something that is a program that brings people like that all together is just, it says something about the program itself, that it can bring that level of people in such an incredible setting. So yeah, I was inspired every day by that.
Wonderful, thank you. Sarah, what about you? Anything you would give as advice for potential LUMES students as well?
Yeah, I was also just thinking about how like both you learn so much from the people coming from different backgrounds and different countries, and then also in the program it's like so many different like branches, and I feel like you can do many different things with that depending on like what you're interested in. So I think that's really good.
Wonderful. And Elaine, we'll finish with you. Top tips for EMP.
And it's very sad to hear Tamsin talk about like all things we've missed in the last 1 year. So hopefully we get a Christmas party this December. But I think for me it's about the community, like just at the institute, it's very close knit. So you form like even just outside the academics, like real friends, I think, who like become your friends even outside after the 2 years. So which I think is like really amazing.
Great. Well, I want to say thank you so much to our panel here today. It has been so wonderful to hear about your experiences, both current and in the past at Lund. I want to thank you for sharing those. And I also want to thank our audience who have had some wonderful questions for us today. So hopefully everyone has learned a lot. And just before we go, I want to point out again in the chat, the links that I've sent you guys for our audience. So of course, the first link there is if you have any other questions about the program, you can find a lot of information about the programs there. The second link, chatting with our students, you actually could talk anytime with Sarah and Elaine, who are both two of our current student ambassadors, as well as around 70 or 80 other students from all over the world and studying different programs. So if you think of any questions after the event that you missed, feel free to log on and chat with them there. If you have any questions about your admissions process or anything and you're not able to make our future events, feel free to use that third link to get in touch with our staff and we can help answer those questions there. And as I mentioned, we have a lot of other events coming up, a lot of which will be specifically about helping you through the application process, specifically our application week next week, which has 20 different events in it, one of which will be with the program staff again from our environment program. So if you missed the one this week, feel free to join next week and get those questions answered. So again, thank you so much to everyone today. It's been a great session, and I wish you all a wonderful rest of your day.
Thank you.
Thank you. Good luck.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye.